The U.S. State Department under the Biden administration removed but then reinstated the phrase the U.S., quote, does not support Taiwan independence. However, the phrase Taiwan is part of China was permanently removed. Wen-Ti, firstly, why do these changes matter, these changes in wording?
I think this shift is in line with Trump administration broader turn towards much more transactional steelmaking diplomacy, one that's characterized often by a more maximum pressure language, but one that at the end of the day still try to not make the boat capsize, if you will. And by that I mean that if you were Taiwan, you're looking at the recent change in wording on the U.S. State Department's website about Taiwan-U.S. relations, you'll be thinking about a couple of things. First, there is removal of the sentence that U.S. does not support Taiwan independence. If you look at from Taipei, you might think, well, that may indicate an increase in U.S. openness to Taiwan's pursuit of its political status as it sees fit. But if you look at another way, there's addition of one additional language back into the statement as well from the U.S. side. And that addition is that there is a mention of how they want cross-strait outcome in the future to be one that's acceptable to people on both sides of Taiwan Strait. If you're looking at it as Taipei, you'll be thinking, is this potentially giving Xi Jinping somewhat of a de facto veto over Taiwan's ability to choose its own future as in line with the wishes of Taiwanese people? So if you're looking at from Xi Jinping's perspective, you'll be thinking, oh, okay, this seems to be U.S. erecting a guardrail here. That's U.S. indicating to me that I'm not going to be supportive of the ultimate outcome Beijing doesn't want to see. But at the same time, U.S. is throwing a new additional variable that's going to make Beijing a little bit anxious, and maybe in the anxiety will get Beijing to give Washington some more bargaining chips as well. So again, driving a hard bargain, but one that may make Taipei happy a little bit, but doesn't exactly make Beijing unhappy on the matters that truly matter.
Ian, what was your assessment?
So I think the removal of the does not support Taiwan independence goes back to a phrase that was first publicly articulated by then U.S. President Bill Clinton as part of his 3 no's. That does not support Taiwan independence line had been hotly debated and continues to be hotly debated. I suppose where I'd agree with Wen-Ti is perhaps, that's the Trump administration saying, well, if you want to, play hardball, we can also do the same. With regard to the outcome acceptable to people on both sides of the strait, that also is reflective. It's not exactly the same language, but it's reflective of the language in the 1972 U.S.-China communique, which talks about the U.S. acknowledging, not recognizing or accepting, but acknowledging that the Chinese people on both sides of the strait need to, come to some sort of understanding, right? So that's, I guess, a guardrail, perhaps a backstop, as Wen-Ti had put it. In addition, I think the bit about putting the language there also suggests that the PRC, Washington wants the PRC to understand that coercion, instability should be off the table, because that's a response, I think, to increased PRC military activity around Taiwan, but also across East Asia.
Right. And of course, we know that in the statement between President Trump and Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, Wen-Ti, they also said for the first time they oppose any attempt to unilaterally change the status quo in Taiwan through force or, as well, through coercion.
What is clear is that the Trump administration has a certain approach, and that approach is that it tends to problematize the previously unproblematic. Additional language that we just mentioned, for example, language that will make Beijing slightly anxious, for example, on a Taiwan issue, I think is one indicator. And through problematizing the previously unproblematic, they are creating new bargaining leverage where the none might have existed before. With the new development between U.S. and Japan, I think this is an instance of we've seen Japan playing the game effectively now with the new U.S. foreign policy, whereby Japan knows the rule of the game today is pay to play. And you're seeing Japan really upgrading its level of economic relations with the U.S. in a way that's going to, as we've seen so far, induce U.S. to feel a higher level, comfort level with showing more robust posture on that U.S.-Japan joint statement when it comes to Taiwan Strait as well.
And what are the practical impacts of including that? or coercion?
Practical impact, of course, it's going to mean a higher level of deterrence, for sure. I think coming out of U.S., Japan, vis-a-vis China. And I think if you're looking at it from China's perspective, you'll be like, sure, I can look at it pessimistically or I can look at it optimistically. If I were being optimistic from Beijing's perspective, I'll be thinking, it's okay, it's a one-time thing. But if I were pessimistic, I'll be thinking, Prime Minister Ishiba right now has a lot of incentive to find room for foreign policy assertiveness projection as a way to regain political capital. So this is one manifestation, and once you have it, once the genie is out of the box, that might then create more path dependencies that make subsequent US-Japan joint statement in the future at least as tough as this, because once you pop, it's harder to go back.
Does it have any impact on China?
So I guess Beijing will probably be wondering what its next step might be. It certainly throws a little bit of uncertainty into the mix. But I guess, well, I agree that the reads from what Wen-Ti had expressed certainly are there. But there's also a question, I suppose, that people in Beijing will ask themselves: are these statements from the Trump administration something that we can actually believe will be there? Because one of the issues with Trump and his unpredictability is that, yes, it makes other people guess, but also makes people guess about his commitment. Is he just saying this? Are these statements that he will trade away for something? So yes, there's a degree of deterrence maybe, but there could also be an introduction of a desire or an incentive for Beijing to try to test the lines, see whether Trump really means what he says.
Okay, let's go now to the change in terms of the US supporting Taiwan's membership or participation in international organizations. So essentially what we have now is the US saying that it will continue to support Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organizations, including membership where applicable. Now, this is worded slightly differently previously. Wen-Ti, if you could dissect that for us, what do these changes amount to?
I think what it looks like is that whereas previously U.S. support for Taiwan's meaningful participation in international organizations like the UN, like the WHO, whereas used to be more, there used to be a ceiling to it, a visible ceiling, and that ceiling is that Taiwan will only be supported in participating in international organizations where statehood is not a requirement. Now that ceiling seems to have been lifted if you're judging from the text itself. Now, of course, if you're Taiwan, you'll be like, again, this seems to be an increasing intensity of U.S. support, at least potential support in theory for Taiwan's greater international presence. But like Ian said earlier, I think whether this is something that will be a harbinger of more to come, or whether it will be sort of a last hurrah of a strong U.S.-Taiwan relations era remains to be seen.
Ian, do you want to add to that?
Yes, so that bit about not supporting Taiwan's participation in international organizations where sovereignty is a prerequisite, that again goes back to Clinton's 3 no's, which had been very controversial. Now, at this point in time, when the U.S. says, well, it'll support Taiwan participation in international organizations, it's a bit of a mixed bag, because the current Trump administration and many Republicans, they are highly skeptical, to say the least, of international organizations.
Themselves for the U.S.
Absolutely, and we've seen the U.S. Withhold funding for the UN and also other parts of the UN system. They continue to jam up the WTO. So, if the U.S. has taken itself out of a more leading position in international organizations, it's less clear how they can advance Taiwan's membership. And secondly, even if Taiwan is able to participate, the question is, what kind of international organization are they participating in? A degraded international organization, sure, you get to some participation points, but will it really do the kinds of things that perhaps Taiwan might want? Or is it better off doing some other sort of action? That also remains unknown.
Right. Okay. So we spoke about how China might be reading these signals. Given all the comments from the White House as well on Taiwan, as well as these changes on the State Department website, how confusing are these signals to Taiwan itself?
I think a lot of the changes are confusing for sure. They could all be noise, but some of them could be signal. And I think what we can do is that we have to work on the assumption that some of them are meant to be meaningful signal to at least one or more parties, and then work on the basis of that. Again, of course, if you're Taipei, you're looking at this, you're thinking about, we know that in Trump administration, there's a division between hawks and dove. We know there are hawks who are much more Fox News oriented, much more robust posture vis-a-vis China oriented. At the same time, we also know there are those who have strong voice inside the White House or next to the White House, who also have strong commercial business interests in China as well. Which side will prevail may remain to be seen. And indeed, if you look at key personnel in State Department and Pentagon at the moment, we're also, again, seeing very different voices at work. So I think for Taiwan, the point then is really to find that strategic patience and composure, focus on improving yourself, and focus on building network both with the US, but also with other meaningful potential friends and partners, so that no matter what happens, Taiwan will have a certain level of safety net.